Alright, into some smoother sailing now. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Universal Selector. We'll be discussing what is the Universal Selector, and the Universal Selector versus body tag inheritance. Let's get cracking. So what is the Universal Selector? The Universal Selector applies styles to all elements. Let's take a look at this snippet of HTML. It contains a section and footer. In our CSS, I'm going to apply this style rule. The selector you see here is the Universal Selector. It's an asterisk symbol. The styles inside the declaration block applies to every single element. And when I say every element, I mean every element. Even structural elements like bodies, sections, and footers, as well as, of course, regular content elements like headings and paragraphs. So let's now play around with the Universal Selector inside VS Code. I've set up this simple HTML file where I've got a div container with the class of hero section, and inside it, I've got a heading 1, a paragraph, and a hyperlink. I've also linked a style sheet called app.css, which is currently empty. So let's go and add our Universal Selector, which is the asterisk symbol, grab our curly brackets, and let's add a few properties which will be applied to every single element. Let's make any text property with the color blue. And then I'm also going to add a border top, which is a CSS box model property we haven't spoken about yet. But I do want to use a non-text property so that this will apply to every element. We'll give the border top a width of 5 pixels. It will be solid, and let's make it red. So let's check this out in the browser. So you can see that every text element we have is now blue, and every HTML element has a red border top. The border thickness is 5 pixels, but you can see in some locations it's a bit thicker. So let's have a look in DevTools why this is happening. I'm going to grab the inspector tool. I'm going to click on this first element here. This is the root HTML element, which is getting a red border top. It's this element here in our HTML. The next element is the body element, which is also getting a red border top. If I move my mouse down slightly, you can see that this box is the div container, which is also getting a red border top. Because these are just container elements, the body and the div, without any content between it, it's like the border tops are being stacked on top of one another, which makes them appear thicker. So in a nutshell, any properties that are applied on the Universal Selector are applied on every single element in your HTML. Now, I do quickly want to contrast this to inheritance, which we spoke about in a previous video. I'm going to just comment this out by highlighting it and hitting Command/ on my Mac or Control/ on a Windows. I now want to apply these same styles but using inheritance. I'll grab the body tag and I'll copy these styles in the curly brackets. I'm going to hit refresh, and what we can see is that only the blue color is being applied to our text, and the border top is only being applied once. It's only being applied to the body element, where this style is declared. And if you remember, it's because only text properties are inherited. So the color blue is inherited by all text children, whereas border top is a non-text property, so it's only being applied on the body. Towards the end of the video, I'm going to be doing a more comprehensive comparison between what styles to put on a Universal Selector versus the body, as I know it can be a bit confusing, the subtlety between them. So let's now have a look at how we use the Universal Selector. So we'll now be going through the Universal Selector guidance. The Universal Selector is primarily used for resetting default properties and is not typically used for applying specific styling. It's like doing a factory reset on your computer or phone, completely clearing it out, making it how it was like when you first bought it. So what default properties are we actually resetting? I'm back inside our Quill project, where we got up to in the last video. I'm going to open up DevTools. I'm going to grab the inspector and click on a few elements. We'll start with this heading. You can see on this heading, it's got some default margin, which is space between the element and other elements. You can see it in the orange. Same thing with the paragraph. It's got some built-in spacing called margin between the paragraph and the elements surrounding it. If I go up to our navigation bar, these list items, which are inside an unordered list, they've also got some default styling. If I hover over the left here to select the unordered list, you can see this green box, which is called padding, It's default styling rules applied to unordered lists, so that our lists get slightly indented. So we typically use the Universal Selector to remove this default styling of margin and padding. So the properties we put inside the Universal Selector have to do with CSS box model properties, which we will be looking at great length in the next topic. So we don't really have much use for it right now, but we will be using it to remove the default spacing on elements, specifically margin and padding. Don't even worry about what those terms mean right now. Just realize it's not used for setting any text properties. Back in our Quill project, at the top of the global styles, I just want to go make a comment, which will be add in Universal Selector later to remove default spacing properties. So we can't use the Universal Selector just yet, because we still need to understand more about the CSS box model. But once we do understand that, we will replace this comment with the Universal Selector and some box model properties that will remove the default spacing. And while we're here, I just want to remind you again that we use inheritance on the body type selector to set all font properties. So just to drive the message home of the difference between the Universal Selector and body tag inheritance, I've created this table to compare them side by side, as I personally found it quite confusing to know what is used where. So let's start with the body tag and inheritance. The CSS properties we add inside the body only applies text properties to its children. So it's primarily used to set default text properties across our application. On the other hand, the Universal Selector applies all properties to all elements throughout the application, not just text properties. The Universal Selector is primarily used to reset default styles, which again, we need to learn about box model properties to implement this. In a one-sentence nutshell, the body tag and inheritance is used to apply styles, whereas the Universal Selector is used to remove styles. So that's probably the easiest way to think about it. Body tag and inheritance, adding text styles. Universal Selector, removing default styles. So let's finish up by continuing to add to our summary card inheritance and the Universal Selector. So in this video, we looked at the Universal Selector, which applies styles to all elements. The Universal Selector is an asterisk symbol, and in this example, the color blue and border top is applied to every single HTML element. We saw that the guidance was the Universal Selector is most commonly used for resetting default styles. Don't forget, you can download all the summary cards and presentation slides from the bootcamp in the link in the description below. Your feedback means a lot to me. Drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get updates by clicking here, and click here to move on to the next video in the playlist.